Okay, so I'm going to make this quick because I recorded 25 minutes of commentary and maybe I rambled on a bit. So maybe it's better that I just record a more condensed video, but I'm going to try to make this short because I don't think I might just not be able to record this league if for some reason it's not recording in, and I have no idea why it wasn't because there's no indication that my microphone was off or that it's off now. So I have no idea why there was no audio. There just wasn't. But let's get to it. Okay, same list as last time. We got Aether Vial, Silvergill, Spreading Seas, Deprive, Lord of Atlantis, Master Control, Trident, Merfolk Trickster, Force Negation, Dismember, and Repeal. Like I said, on Twitter, the Repeals and Relics can be easily interchanged, and I think Repeal in the main deck is slightly better, well, at least in most metas. So there you go. Repeal in the main. There it is. Yeah. So, but what's the difference? Well, as you can see, we are actually playing 12 black sources. This is technically going to be a blue source most of the time, the vast majority of the time, but like maybe 15 to 20% of the time it will be a black source, and when it's a black source, you really need it. And there's virtually no downside other than Blood Moon, which I'll get to in a moment. And what that enables us to do, and thanks to a fellow Twitter user and subscriber here on YouTube, Mathematic, thank you very much for this suggestion. And of course, I do know that Lurrus has been an idea that has been both tested and bounced around with the community, where I don't think there's like a clear consensus on whether it's better with or without yet. But Mathematic specifically said, hey, this particular list plays no creature, permanents that are above 3 mana cost. So I can just play Lurrus even if I don't have black lands, and then I can just file it in. So I did discover, like, hey, why not play Lurrus? And I did test for a bit, and I do think that playing some black lands does give you just a little extra EV, but it did surprise me that Lurrus is completely serviceable, even with 0 black sources, just off of Aether Vial, because most of the time, you're playing it off of Aether Vial anyway, because it's just kind of a little too mana intensive most of the time without, although sometimes it does come up. But for those times that it does come up, it is nice to have these black sources. And the thing I like about this is there really isn't much downside to these black lands. This is completely painless, so same as mono blue. I take 0 damage off of my mana base. Darkslick Shores will be the same as an island, but just better because it can also help cast Dismembers Phyrexian mana if I don't want to lose life, and cast Lurrus. But it will be at least as good as an island, probably like 90% of the time, if not more. It does come into play tap once in a while, but 90% of the time, even if it does come into play tap later in the game, usually it doesn't really make that big of a difference. So, Darkslick Shores is almost free. Yeah, and it is, and even in a mono blue version, there might have been some. Even if we weren't playing Lurrus, there might have been some consideration to have it just to help pay for Dismember, which actually comes up more than you might think, particularly against Burn. Suddenly, Dismember is not a dead card against Burn if you can actually pay the pay 3 for it, or even 2 sometimes. But like, yeah, if you don't have to take 4 life of it, it's not actually dead and Burn. And Clearwater Pathway is essentially free, unlike Darkslick Shores, but on the other hand, you have to choose one or the other, and most of the time you're going to choose blue, so most of the time it's not going to help you cast Lurrus, but the fact that it can in a pinch, if you really need it, makes it really good. Downside, of course, is that we're weaker to Blood Moon, but we do have 4 islands, which means we're about as likely to draw islands as we are Aether Vial, and we see how often we do draw Aether Vial, so it's fairly likely that we'll see at least 1 island during a game, if not 2. With just 4, so 4 is a good number. It's not like the most optimal number, but it's a good enough number that we're not completely a fish out of water, pardon the pun, against Blood Moon. But the other nifty thing is, of course, we have Aether Vial, which Blood Moon, like Aether Vial decks, well, the world over will tell you how invaluable this can be at just not losing on the spot against Blood Moon and being able to potentially sometimes still squeeze out wins. But another nifty thing this deck can do that most other Aether Vial decks can't is we can Spreading Seas our own non-basics under Blood Moon, and then voila, we have 2 blue sources, and we've unlocked our deck. So, let's go over the sideboard really briefly. Chalice of the Void needs no further explanation. I've gone over this a lot in the past. Fundamentally, essentially, the main problem with Merfolk is that it's kind of clunky with all these 2-drops, and Chalice just deals with one of the fundamental main problems with Merfolk, which is decks that are heavy on 1-drops and go under it and are more efficient. And and Chalice Chalice doesn't just hose one deck. It hoses like the fundamental biggest conceptual problem Merfolk has, which is decks that play an abundance of powerful 1-drops, whereas we play an abundance of powerful 2-drops. And Nihil Spellbomb. This is objectively probably the best graveyard hate spell that you can play if you have access to black, which we do. So it is nice that we can play this. I did have Nihil Spell. I did have Soul Guide Lantern in the main for a while. If you opt to play Graveyard Hate in the main, I think Soul Guide Lantern is slightly better in this version because it does come up sometimes where you're not facing a graveyard deck and you don't have any black source, or you have Clearwater Pathway, and you're really probably going to screw yourself up more by putting a black into play. Like if you've got like an island and a Clearwater Pathway, putting it into play as a black source and not being able to cast any of your 2 blue spells if you don't have Aether Vial is a lot of times just going to like hurt you more than not be able to cycle Nihil Spellbomb. So yeah, so anyway, but since if we opt to play our Grave Hate in the sideboard, which is where most people play it anyway, we can play objectively probably the most powerful Graveyard Hate spell, and unlike a red deck, we have counter magic too for a lot of matchups like Oops All spells. So if they do happen to have Leyline, it's not as devastating. Some decks may opt to play Soul Guide Lantern simply because it gets around Leyline, but we don't. But even if they play Leyline, we're still not completely out of luck. We can still repeal it too. We can still Echoing Truth it if we bring those in. Also, we can still just counter whatever they're trying to play instead of just trying to hose the graveyard part of it. Anyway. Yeah, so that's Nihil Spellbomb. And I'm not seeing as many Uro decks. That's the main reason, I think, to play Graveyard Hate in the main. Obviously, every once in a while you'll run into All Spells or Dreads, but I don't see those. I never even saw those too often, even when they were played more often than they are now. But Uro was definitely played in huge numbers. I'm seeing those less because we're in a Tibalt's Trickery world right now. I actually was doing well. I was actually getting a lot of 4-1s, but never been doing as well lately. Not gonna lie. So this league might not go well. Hopefully, at least we finish in a positive with 3-2. Wouldn't be surprised if we go 2-3. I hope we don't go 1-4. I haven't gone a clean 0-5 yet, but like I think the first league I played definitely with this in this new Tibalt's Trickery format, I went 1-4 and. That sucked. One reason is because I totally forgot, man. I Violent Outburst is an instant. I think the first Rude Awakening was I had a Merfolk Trickster and a Deprive in hand. End of turn I played Merfolk Trickster. I didn't even know they were Tibalt's Trickery because they were just playing like regular looking lands. Like I think Breeding. I thought they were an Euro deck. They played like Breeding Pool. They played like I don't know some stuff. I thought a lot of times Euro decks will keep hands without any spells and they'll just wait till turn 3 or something. And they might hold up Force Negation instead of playing in a row. So anyway, I didn't even know it was a Tibalt's Trickery deck, and I play Merfolk Trickster end of turn, and boom, Violent Outburst, and I'm even holding a Deprive in hand, and I'm like, this is the new format we have. I'm like, wow, yeah. So yeah. So anyway, like those decks aren't unbeatable, but they're way. Actually, I thought those decks were like a complete joke at first. I mean, I thought they would fold. Not joke. I mean, obviously they're powerful against non-counterspell decks. I thought those decks would just completely fold to counter magic. Boy, was I wrong. And particularly because, I mean, the original versions that only played, like, Tibalt's Trickery and Emerald Cool and a Cascade spell and nothing else, like, yeah, those are kind of a joke, but very quickly people realized all you had to do was basically play more Cascade spells and more payoffs. Sure, you wouldn't hit the best payoff from Emerald Cool all the time, but, as if you paid more, most of the time, if you hit, like, an Urlamog or I think another one was something ultimatum, like the green-blue ultimatum, or whatever, the Bant ultimatum, maybe whatever, one of those ultimatums. Like the point is you can, if you fill your deck up with enough different Cascade spells and enough different, as long as those Cascade spells aren't under 3, which I don't even think there are under 3 anyway. There might be like 1. I think they did print like 1, but as long as you don't play that one. Yeah, then you're more resilient because then you can play up to 4 Tibalt's Trickeries, and as long as you don't get unlucky and cascade into that instead of one of your more numerous payoffs, then bam, So like that was another Rude Awakening, end of turn Violent Outburst. Okay, Deprive, and if I don't I think I had 2 Deprives, and there's I didn't have Force Negation, so it's like end of turn Violent Outburst. It's like okay, I got this. Okay, their turn, Violent Outburst, and I'm like, okay, they got another Tibalt's Trickery. Okay, there's like a I forget what it was, Elis Norn or something. They produced some obscene creature that I couldn't win against. And I'm just like, okay, well, this is the new format. I thought this was just going to fold to counter magic, but there you go. Well, we'll see. I'm actually still getting used to playing against them. Now, I'm not saying... I have to imagine playing 8 freaking main deck counterspells. I have to imagine that once I get a feel and a handle for how to play against these decks, I will probably have a positive win rate, and it might even be a truly good matchup. But these decks are much trickier to play against than I originally anticipated. The same actually thing happened with Prowess and with the Shadow decks. When I first played, they felt completely unbeatable, and it almost felt hopeless. But I never completely give up, and I don't even completely write off certain cards. Like I always tell myself when I first play a matchup, like I gotta play a bigger sample size, and I gotta got more experience. I gotta think more about how to approach it with the cards I have. Unless I've exhausted every possible strategy I can think of with the cards I have, do I either like say, well, maybe I have to play different cards. Maybe very rarely do I think I actually have to play a different deck to deal with the strategy. But then again, I'm not playing like True Glass Cannons like Belcher or something, and Merfolk is a fairly flexible deck. In a way, I ended up switching to a different deck, sort of, in red, because I used to play Mono Red Burn, now I play a deck that's much more akin to Prowess. I do call it Prowess, but, I moved from a deck that was actually, I was already kind of like more on the Prowess side of Burn, back when I was on Burn, because I used to play 4 Soulscar Mages in my Mono Red Burn deck. It does show you that the line between... Anyway, I know this isn't a video about red, but I do find it funny that in a way, the line between Burn and Prowess isn't completely set in stone. It does exist, and I think the main difference is, in my opinion, one of the main differences is whether you play Lava Spike. But of course, the old Prowess decks did play Lava Spike. I never understood that, though. I never liked it, even when I played old Prowess. To me, Lava Spike is the quintessential Burn card, because in like true red decks wins, like the old-fashioned not Burn red decks, fundamentally, your main objective is to win with creature damage, and your burn spells, they can go face, but their main reason, at least early in the game, is to clear the path. So I don't know, whatever. That's neither here nor there. Never completely understood why the Prowess decks played Lava Spike. I never liked it. I tried probably like a couple leagues. That was one of the first things I did with when I was trying actual Prowess instead of Burn. And I did start with the old Reveler version way back when. First thing I did was like I just didn't like Lava Spike. I'm just like, you're gone. I don't care if everybody agrees that this is like the best card. I don't care. The first thing I did was I just got Lava Spike right out there. Like, I'm not Burn. I'm just not Burn. Get out of here, Lava Spike. And I think I replaced it with Firebolt, and that's fundamentally why I love Firebolt so much. It's just I'm like, well, Firebolt, yep. Lava Spike, eh. So anyway, but we are talking about Merfolk, and I think I'm just about ready to head into the league. I know there's the elephant in the room staring us right in the face. I'll get to that in 1 second. I'll just quickly say, Echoing Truth, it helps against like large creatures like Platinum Empyrean or multiple Ensnaring Bridges. And of course we got Repeal for that too, but mainly it's for like big permanents or tokens, so it helps deal with the very big and the very small. And with only 2 copies, if I see one in late in the game, it basically, at least for 1 turn, deals with all of them all at once, which is pretty nice and a very powerful effect to have a card that you're not particularly likely to see early, and you're very unlikely to see more than 1 copy. I really like effects like that as a 2-of. Since I only have 2 slots left to work with, since I've got a Lurrus in the main, I think Echoing Truth is the fairly obvious inclusion here. Then the elephant in the room. I used to have Pithing Needle here. Now it's Disrupting Shoal, and I'll just tell you why. It's Tybalt's Trickery. And it's not just Tybalt's Trickery, but like also this can help counter like Stoneforge Mystic. Now if they're playing like Taxes, they might Aether Vial it in, so it might not always work. But yeah, I like it against Tybalt's Trickery. Now why this rather than Spell Snare? Now, other than the fact that I'm sure Spell Snare did jump up in price, that's not really a concern to me, unless it's like $1,000 a piece or something. I don't think I'm gonna. Well, if it's $100, it's true probably, but like I'm not. It's not gonna like dissuade me from getting it if it's like unless it's like absurdly expensive now, which it might be because of freaking Tybalt's Trickery. But aside from the fact that I was surprised when I looked through my collection and I'm like, I don't have Spell Snare. And I did that right before this. I did that actually in the last video that for some reason didn't have audio. But yeah. But I'm like, wait a minute. But I'm like, why don't I have Spell Snare? I mean, I remember countering things that cost exactly 2, and I'm like, oh, because I used to play Disrupting Shoal for a while. Sure enough, I still have my Disrupting Shoals. And I thought, like, the more I thought about it, I thought, I'll just run a league with Disrupting Shoal instead of Spell Snare, and I'll explain why. It's the same reason why I used to play it. It's mainly because together with Chalice, it can be very powerful because think of a deck like Prowess, for example. Unless they're playing Obosh Prowess, and specifically Obosh Prowess with Shattering Spree instead of like a Braid or for that matter Pillage. Pillage is not really want to be against Merfolk specifically because it's always a shitting duck to force a negation. It's just begging to be countered by force negation. But yeah, Shattering Spree, not really much we can do about that. And that is definitely, if we're on the prowess side, one thing to consider about Shattering Spree is like just that there's really no good protection for Chalice against it. But a Braid is probably the most common card among all prowess variants, including the Giganta prowess decks I play or the companionless versions. They do conflict with Obosh, so if we see Obosh, it's probably a Braid's not going to be the one we battle. But yeah, a Braid is one of the most common artifact hate spells, and for good reason. It's incredibly solid, incredibly versatile. So like the fact that we can disrupt control at any time, we can just drop Chalice, and then we've got protection from Braid at all times. It's pretty strong. And we can also deal with some random 2-drops that Chalice can't deal with. Like for example, Sprite Dragon. Drop Chalice. They might hope. Sometimes they can cheese us with Sprite Dragon. It just buffs to like a 7/7, 8/8 flying, and then even if they cast no other spells, sometimes we just can't deal with that, and it's always so cheesy. It's very frustrating when that happens, but it is something we have to respect, and Disrupting Shoal helps because we can drop Chalice. Also, we can drop Aether Vial on turn 1 and still be able to counter 2-drops. Because make no mistake, Disrupting Shoal is basically a Force of Spell Snare. In this deck, it's Force of Spell Snare because we've got 22 drop. No, we've got 24 2-drops. True, we got one 1-drop as far as Disrupting Shoal is concerned. Repeal will count as a 1-drop if we pitch it, and we've got 1 3-drop of Force Negation if that's still in our deck, which it probably will be if we bring in Disrupting Shoal. But with 24 2-drops and only 4 1-drops and 4 3-drops, with 24 2-drops, this is basically Force of Spell Snare. But it might sound weird, like, well, why not just pay 1 more mana and just not have to pitch a card? Well, it's mostly because it doesn't conflict with Chalice, But also, it is nice that we don't have to take a turn off from playing Aether Vial. I don't know if that's worth it all by itself. It is also a little more versatile too, because we can bring it in against some decks, against some control decks even, and sometimes being able to be both a Force of Spell Snare and a counter for anything if we've got enough mana later in the game is kind of nice. Anyway, let's try it out. We may just move to Spell Snare, for now, I conceptually like the idea. For example, against Burn, we probably wouldn't bring in Spell Snare because although it is strong against Burn, it conflicts with Chalice, and it also doesn't help protect Chalice. We are seeing more and more Burn, so I just kind of like, it's the main. Again, the main reason just for Disrupting Shoal is it doesn't conflict with Chalice. Anyway, let's get to it. I really hope the audio is recording. I'm looking at my mic symbol right now. It says turn microphone off. That means it's on. I did a test before this. It said the audio is on. Please, please, please. I don't want to lose the audio. All right, let's get into it and hope to see you in the leagues instead of doing another one of these videos. All right.